already pretty far into the first week of February, and that means that the field trip's going to be here before you know it. So any paperwork that you need to get sent in, any forms that Chris has contacted you about or given to you, would you get those? Do you have anything more specific you want to say?
Just those three
Okay.
for now.
Okay. All right, today we're going to talk about Mary Anning, and this will be an introduction into our trip to the southernmost part of England, down along the Dorset coast, or what they call the Jurassic Coast. It's a World Heritage Site, and there's quite a bit of information about it on the internet. There are books that have been written about it. So, to put it in context, the way we're going to get to Lyme Regis, which is here, this will be basically our last major stop before we head to London towards the end of the field trip. So we'll come down from Edinburgh, gone to Cambridge, come across this way up to Shrewsbury, down through the Welsh borders, to Bath over here. And after our morning in Bath, we will head down to Lyme Regis, which is, again, right on the southern coast. It's in Dorset, which borders Devon. So we'll almost get into the type Devonian, but we don't have time to do that. So in the next image, I'll show you a Google Earth image of just this area. So you can see Lyme Regis down here, Axminster, Coylton, Seaton, Exmouth, and out into Devonshire. So if we zoom in on this spot right here, so here's Lyme Regis. There's not enough room for all of us to stay there, so some of us will be taking the bus over the hill to the little town of Beer right here. So let's zoom in on that square. And here's the town of Seaton. Here's the little village of Beer, right along the coast. And this is really kind of a nice opportunity for us, because faulting has downdropped some of the Cretaceous. So there is a stretch of beach that's a couple miles long that is just essentially like the Dorset Coast chalk cliffs at Dover. So we'll have a chance to see some chalk cliffs for at least a glimpse at them. But we'll just be staying here overnight, one night, and just hike down to the cliffs real quick. So here's an image that we took last time, looking down on the beach there at Beer. But most of the time that we spend down in this area will be over in Lyme Regis. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Lyme Regis and its history. The places are almost as important and interesting as the people. And as you know, England's been around for a while, a lot of history, and a lot of places with cumulative history piled up one on top of the other. And we won't have time to do all that, so if some of you want to do some background reading about some of the history of the area and want to share that with us, that'd be awesome. Okay. So just to give you sort of a sense of where we're at, here's the town of Lyme Regis. Here's the beach that fronts the town. Out here is a structure, a breakwater that is called the Cobb. It's been around since the 1300s in one incarnation of another. This is Monmouth Beach and Chipple Bay. This is at high tide. I'll show you a picture of it at low tide. 7 Point Rock, Pinhay Bay. We will take time to hike out about that far. That's about all the time that we will have. You could also hike this way and see rocks exposed along the church cliffs, so named because St. Michael's Church is directly above it there. A mile or so farther up the coast is the beautiful little village of Charmouth, and then in between them is a high hill called the Black Ven, and you can see all the landslides that characterize the Black Ven.
How far is that hike?
It's about 2 miles. but you can drive there too. But. So here is an image looking from the beach here toward the main part of Lyme Regis, and you can see that it's now a fairly popular place for people to visit, have summer homes, summer cottages. The main point I want you to see here is that it's right down against the beach and it's backed by a pretty steep hill. So as we walk up Broad Street, you'll get a feel for how steep it is, right? So the town is just sort of at the foot of this hill between the hill and the ocean. Here's a close-up map of the Cobb here. Marine Parade along here where there are summer homes. Broad Street is the main street coming down to Bridge Street and then Church Street. And so this is the main part of the town, and where we'll spend some time, and then out here along Monmouth Beach. Monmouth Beach is named after a nobleman, the Duke of Monmouth. His name was James Scott, and in 1685 he tried to overthrow the British government, and he and his compatriots landed on Monmouth Beach and started a revolution there. James II had just replaced Charles II, who had recently died, and James II was the brother of Charles II, but James Scott was the illegitimate son of Charles II, so he felt like he should be the king instead of his half-brother. So on June 11th of 1685, he and his troops came aboard. They marauded through some local countryside, but by July 15th, he found himself hanged, and that was the end of the Monmouth Revolution. But the beach is still named Monmouth Beach because that's where they landed. Let's see. So here is a picture from up on the hill in town looking out towards the Cobb. So here's this breakwater, and the town of Lyme Regis has been around since Saxon times. It was incorporated in the 1300s by a royal charter, and came to be known at that point. It's on the River Lyme, so it was called Lyme. But once it got that royal charter, it was called Lyme Regis, and that's the name it's had ever since the 1300s. Early on, it was an important seaport in trading with continental Europe. And it continued to be an important seaport until the 1800s, when the ships just got too big to be able to get into the water that was this shallow. But one of the reasons it was a good seaport is because it had this breakwater that we still see today, although the Cobb that we see today is not the original. It's been ripped out by waves a number of times and rebuilt bigger and better each time. This is a fairly well-known town that's been visited by a lot of famous people. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The French Lieutenant's Woman, based on the book The French Lieutenant's Woman. And in this incarnation, it starred Meryl Streep and Jeremy Irons. And here they are in the poster for the movie, standing out on the Cobb in a loving embrace. And let's see how tall they are. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, 6, maybe 7 rows high, right? Now let's take a look at the Cobb. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so they would have been that tall. So they were really, Meryl Streep and Jeremy Irons are huge. They're not just big actors, they are big actors. So this is the Cobb. First mention of it in 1328. And it talks about being damaged by storms. It was originally made of oak piles that were driven into the sea floor, floated out on barrels, and then they threw big rocks in between. For you Jane Austen fans out there, one of her famous books is Persuasion. And Jane Austen visited Lyme Regis at least 3 times, it was recorded. in 1803. She spent several weeks in 1804 enjoying the ambiance of the town, and that inspired her to write the book Persuasion. And there's one scene in there where Louisa Musgrove falls off of the granny's teeth off the steps into the arms of her lover there. And so Tennyson, when he got to Lyme Regis, he said he went straight to the Cobb to find the exact spot where Louisa Musgrave fell off of the granny's teeth into the arms of her boyfriend. So,
Did that happen when we're there?
yeah, we'll do a dramatic reenactment. You know, it's too bad Randy Skinner's not here because I think he'd be all over this. That'd be his thing. So, okay. So here's, you can see why they built the Cobb. Here's a winter storm. So it's right on the southern part of the British English Channel. You get huge winter storms that come up along the channel and abuse the coast. So hopefully it's not going to be like that when we're there. If it is, that'll curtail some of the stuff that we're going to do. So start now praying for good weather. Not only here, but you know, nice sunny or at least light rainy days so that we can do the things we want to. There's another winter storm coming in, and you can see that it's getting pretty close to town. The Great Gale of 1824 pushed this merchant ship, the Unity, right up into town, up against the Cobb, and then over into town. And they had to rescue a number of people from the shipwreck. Now here's an image during a storm. So what I want you to do, just to give you so that you'll be impressed by where those waves are, take a look at that window right there in that chimney, and I'll show you what it's going to look like, hopefully, when we're there. Oh, before we do that, in that 1824 storm, here's a letter from a resident. "Oh, Fanny, you cannot conceive what a scene of horror we've gone through at Lyme. It's quite a miracle that the inhabitants saved their lives. Every bit of the walk from the assembly rooms to the Cobb is gone, and all the back parts of the houses on the shore side of town. All the coal cellars and coals being gone, and the Cobb so shattered that no vessel will be safe here. We're obliged to sit without fires this winter, a cold prospect you will allow." So take a look at the house there. Here's what it should look like when we're there. So that's pretty impressive that the waves are crashing against that wall right there. This is a more typical sea level without the storm surge. Okay. This is an image of right downtown, right at the coast. It's called the Buttle. This is where the River Lyme meets the ocean, and it's all grown over and channelized and bridges over it and so on. And so when those big storms came in, they would rip off the backs of these houses. And Mary Anning's house, the back of her house got ripped off one time in a storm. Here's what it looks like today. This is the Philpott Museum, or it's now called the Lyme Regis Museum. We'll visit that. It has a lot of natural history, a lot of Mary Anning types of things in it. So that's one of the places we'll go to.
So did you do that Photoshop composite?
Yeah, I took what it looks like and threw it over the
Very
old one.
good.
Let's see. Oh yeah, here's the Duke of Monmouth coming ashore. Here's what it looks like today. Now, this is a bathing machine. During Victorian England, or during the time of Victorian England, it was just not done that you would put on your bather as a woman and be seen in public. So if you wanted to go down to the beach and get in the water, you would get inside of this bathing machine. The horses and the servants would then lower this into the water up to here. You would go in, you would change from your clothing, put on your bather that went from your ankles to your neck to your wrists, and then the doors would open out, and you would go down the stairs and bathe, and then you would reverse that, and the horse would drag you back in. By the time you popped out, you'd be back into your full regalia. So super modest. Okay? So that's the way they would bathe there in the 1800s. One of the main parts of town is this intersection of Broad Street, Bridge Street, and the Marine Parade. Here's what that looks like looking towards the northeast. Here again you can see the high hills over top. Here's St. Michael's Church where Mary Anning is buried. This is the pilot boat Inn. In World War I, the first ship sunk by a U-boat, oh shoot, I can't remember the name of the ship, but it was in July of 1915, and it was sunk right off the coast of Lyme Regis, and the victims of that were brought, the bodies were brought and put into the pilot boat Inn until the families could, or the military could take care of them. There was one particular sailor by the name of Cowan, and his dog Lassie ran into the museum, or into the inn where the bodies were, was licking his master, and he woke up. So obviously he wasn't dead. But that name Lassie then, well, you know the rest of the story, right? So the show Lassie, the concept of Lassie on radio and TV came from the name of that dog Lassie that was in Lyme Regis.
Are those supposed to be ammonites on the poles?
Yeah, so you can tell that this is a good city. If they would have had foliated nices here, that would be good too, but that's pretty decent. So this is Broad Street coming down here. Are we staying at the Lion Hotel?
No, we're staying in here.
Okay, everybody is?
Yeah, they were
Okay.
gonna stay one night
Okay.
there.
Can we do that with the encore?
Yeah. And then Cobb Gate, you wanna tell them about Cobb?
Yeah, this is where we'll have lunch. This is if you want some real life fish and chips, go in there and they'll be wrapped in the newspaper with the grease. And then you can go right around the corner and sit on a little seawall there, and then the seagulls will come in and annoy you to, ad nauseum while you're trying to eat. This is what it looked like from that same vantage point in the 1800s. So here is the fish shop. Here's that building that was next to it. Here is the hotel. Let's back up. So focus in on these two buildings in this street, and you'll notice that there's a building right here that's no longer there. See it there? Little narrow thing? This was the Anning home. This is where Mary Anning was born in 1799 to Molly and Richard Anning. Here's what it looks like today. That's gone. But here's a vintage 1891 image of that corner. And it was at that time still called the Fossil Depot. Even though Mary Anning died in 1847, this was where she would sell her fossils. And this was a very famous place around for people that were interested in that type of thing. People would come to Lyme, that's one of the things they'd look for. Can you see the ammonoids in the window? So she would sell fossils out of the shop, and that's one of the ways she helped support herself and her family, and her mother and her brother. And here's an old sketch of the fossil shop around 1842. So that was the fossil shop. Then there are no fewer than 4 fossil shops in a town that has the footprint of the BYU campus, the Provo campus. That is a good town. If you don't want to go all the way out to western Utah to collect margit fossils from the Middle Cambrian, you can buy them here.
Mary Ann also construct a complete pterodactyl. Can we buy one of those there too?
Yeah, I'll show you the one you want. Okay. Okay, that's the Lyme Fossil Shop. Here's the Old Forge Fossil Shop. This is the interior of Dinosaurland Museum. This is the Royal Lion Hotel where we've stayed before. Here's the coast. The Cobb is down here. The Fish House is right around the corner, as would of Marianning. So this is down Broad Street where it meets. This is the Three Cups Hotel. It is currently out of business. It has been purchased by a brewing company. I think they've been convinced to leave the facade, but they're going to improve the back of it and add some shops and some living spaces and so on. But it's a very famous building, and so they didn't want to tear it down. People who have stayed here were Tennyson. The place that was here before, well, no, it's just down the street where Jane Austen stayed. In the lobby of the Three Cups, General Eisenhower and some of the British generals and some of his commanders had one of their last meetings before the D-Day invasion. So some of the planning for D-Day took place here. J.R.R. Tolkien, when he would come to Lyme Regis, would stay at the Three Cups. And there are other famous people who stayed here as well. So it's really sort of unfortunate to see that this is looking out one of the rooms towards the Cobb. You can see that it's really fallen into disrepair. So I think there are some efforts to sort of bring it back to some of its glory, but change it a little bit. So here's the Lyme Regis Museum. It was originally called the Philpott Museum. And the name Philpott came from some friends of Mary Anning's. There were 3 Philpott sisters. They came from a fairly wealthy family. Their brother bought them a place. He was married, had job, had things in London. They were old maids, and he bought them a place and sort of sent them off to Lyme Regis. They had some, especially Elizabeth Philpott, had some very close interests with Mary Anning, even though Mary Anning was the poor folk. And they did a lot of collecting together. She had some pretty amazing collections of her own that the well-known geologists of the time would come and look at, including Louis Agassiz and William Buckland and a variety of other famous geologists. So with some of the Philpott money, this Natural History Museum, or History Museum, a lot of it is natural history, Mary Anning and Elizabeth Philpott stuff, was built, and we'll visit that. It's now called the Lyme Regis Museum, and it's right down there close to the coast. So that's a little bit about Lyme Regis downtown. St. Michael's Church is here on Church Street. These are the church cliffs. Again, the black vein, and you can see the number of landslides there. So you get huge waves coming in the winter, and these are essentially shales or interbedded shales and limestones or unconsolidated sands, and they are very, very prone to slumping. This is a sketch that was done by Henry de la Bache in 1822. He was the first director of the Geological Survey of Britain. So we had the London Geological Society, but then we also had the British Survey. And here's a scale here of 1 mile. This is on the west, so here's Beer, Seaton, come across to Lyme Regis here, and then over to Charmouth, and then we continue another. So this is about a 9-mile stretch of coast, and he sketched the topography, then he sketched in the stratigraphy there. So basically what this right here is Triassic, the Triassic-Jurassic boundaries right there, and most of the rest of that is, and it's tilted, dipping back to your right, so you get successively younger as you go to the right, and eventually by the time you get to Devon, or to Dover, you're in the Cretaceous. So this is the uppermost Triassic, and most of the rest of this is lower Jurassic. So here's an aerial image of the Cobb and Lyme Regis Monmouth Beach, and this is at low tide, and you can see the stratigraphy in there, really well exposed. And the lowest stuff is the white lias, and you go up into the blue lias, And you can see that there's a little bit of slight folding there. In this little area, here's a geologist's reconstruction of that low tide in Chipple Bay. And they've got interesting names. This layer's the second quick. This is the top take. This is the mongrel. There's a lower mongrel. And probably 200 names just in the Blue Lias. But landslides continue to be a problem, to be both, it has pros and cons. Okay? So this is May 8th, 2008, and here is a sudden landslide that took place along the Black Vein. In 2012, there was this rock fall. So one of the things we want to be careful of is when we're out here that we're paying attention, right? So chances of that are unlikely, but in that last one in 2012, this is the newspaper article from The Guardian on July 24th, 2012. Young woman who died after being buried by tons of rock following the collapse of a cliff on a beach in Dorset has been identified by her uncle as Charlotte Blackman from Derbyshire. Horrified onlookers, including 22-year-old Ms. Blackman's father and boyfriend. Does that mean her father is her boyfriend, or does that mean her father and a boyfriend? Anyway, okay. Tried to get to her before another huge section of cliff gave way, forcing them back. Gary Rafferty, 36, from Bournemouth, went to help when the first part of the cliff collapsed. I rushed to help and helped a man aged in his 50s, the father, out of the debris. I saw his son-in-law, would-be son-in-law to be, who had also been trapped. I said to him, "Are you all right?" And he said, "No, my girlfriend's trapped under there." He was quite hysterical. So she perished in that landslide. They were just out doing the same things that we're going to be doing. So pay attention. In 1839, the day before Christmas, a huge chunk of the coast called the Undercliff slumped off. And so there was a paper article that came out on that in 1840 by William Conybeare and another fellow named Dawson. William Conybeare, he's the one who named the Carboniferous period, the Carboniferous system. So the first geological increment of time period that was ever named, Conybeare was one of the authors of that. So this was 300 feet wide, 160 feet deep, and 3/4 of a mile long. And so over a period of a couple months, it was slumping off. It had been part of a farm, and this came to be known as Goat Rock. And they were able, even though it had slumped off, they still went up and harvested the crops in 1840 that had been planted in earlier on there. So anyway, very unstable area. A great place if you're interested in studying disaster or geological hazards and slope instability. Stratigraphically, White Lias, Blue Lias, and then there are the Black Vein marls, belemnite marls, green ammonite beds. Those sound like good ones. And then you get up into the middle Jurassic oolites and see some of William Smith's terms: inferior oolite, the fuller's earth, the forest marble, the corn brash, Kellaway's clay. Those are leftover terms from William Smith. So don't worry about memorizing that. Let's just take the Blue and White Lias. Let's have you memorize that instead. Does that work? So what we're looking at here are early Jurassic marine rocks, black shales, gray shales, thin limestones, fossiliferous. Each of these shale limestone packages are cycles, depositional cycles. So we could do a whole day just going out and looking at the depositional packaging and sequence stratigraphy of the Blue Lias, and we're not going to do that. We'll be right here at, so here's the Jurassic-Triassic boundary. This is the Hatangian-Sinemurian boundary. This is the lowest stage of the Jurassic. This is the next one. We'll look at some rocks right in here. The Specity, the second mongrel, the mongrel. You gotta love these names. Rattle shales, the venti. Anyway, we're not going to go into all that, but lower skulls. Some of these are pretty, the Saurian shales, meaning they got a lot of lizards out of those. So,
How thick is that section right there?
that section is probably 300 feet, I'd
That'll
say.
be a day's work.
Huh?
That'll be a day's work.
Yeah, yeah. So here's a image of the actual thing. So here's the Brick Edge Shale, the Brick Ledge, the Lower Skulls Shale, the Underwhite, the Undercopper, the Iron. Anyway, we're not going to learn all those, but you can see there though this alternating shale, limestone, reflecting that cyclical deposition. So you can you imagine a huge winter storm attacking that? So to do the best fossil collecting, you have to get out there right after the storms before the next storm or waves just take those fossils and wash them out to sea. So that's when Mary Anning would do some of her best and most dangerous work.
So did she make the observation that was the best time to collect just after a storm?
Yeah, yeah. She learned that from her father, who took her out from a young age fossilizing. This is kind of a cool layer here. Here's some more, there's a rock fall. But out of the blue lias here, this is kind of a cool layer. This is the Speckety. It's paved with cephalopods that are about that big, right? So you'll see them. You can't collect them because they're embedded in this limestone matrix, but it's kind of a cool layer. Here you can see another big cephalopod weathering out of a little bit higher layer that's fallen down. Here's a lucky great junior high school student named Martin Foster. He found these in the summer of 2011, where we're going to be, just having recently washed out of the hillside. Here's the one here's the one you should take home. You ready?
Oh, right.
You have to put that in the checked
Carry on?
luggage.
No,
Yeah,
checked.
checked. Yeah, they won't let you carry it. So here he is on the mongrel with one of the fossils that this guy's lucky enough to find. We're not going to find those, okay? Well, I mean, we might. I don't want to dissuade him.
What are the laws? Can you take them home if you find a little one, or no one cares?
Yeah. No, there's a Lyme Regis Fossil Day every year where people come from all over and go fossilizing. They're allowed to keep them.
Are you allowed to keep vertebrates or just the invertebrates?
Vertebrates you have to turn in. I think you're allowed to keep the vertebrae from ichthyosaurs if you find them isolated, but I mean, if you found something like that, you'd have to.
Wow.
You
You'd
would
have
have been
to
the British
figure.
version of Pele, will we, by taking these fossils?
Yeah, that's right. Which god will we get mad? Yeah. Okay, so that's the setting, that's the stage. Now we're going to look at the characters on that stage. So she's been called the Princess of Paleontology, and you've probably heard that little tongue twister, she sells by the seashore. That was about Mary Anning. So in her family, her father Richard, her mother Mary, who went by Molly, they were married a bit north and east of town, moved to Coylton, just north of Lyme Regis, but then a few months later moved down to Lyme Regis in 1793, and in the year after, they had their first child, Mary Anning. Then, 2 years later, her brother Joseph. Joseph and Mary were throwing wood shavings into the family fireplace, and Mary's dress caught fire, and by the time her mother got to her, she was dead. Now they were dissenters. They were not members of the Anglican Church. They were looked down on. He was a carpenter. They had no status socially, so they were looked down on. So these were lower class, poor people. And he tried to make a living by being a carpenter. Jane Austen, when she was in town one time, had a wooden case that she would keep things in, and part of it had been broken. So she took this case to Richard Anning and said, could you fix this? And she didn't like the price that he gave her, so she declined the offer. Okay. So anyway, Mary dies horribly. The family's devastated. In 1799, they have their third child, a girl, and they name her Mary Anning. So now we have Mary Anning, the mom, Mary Anning the first, Mary Anning the second. Okay. When Mary was 1 year old, a neighbor invited, or two of the neighbor women, friends of Molly, said, look, we realize that you've got a lot going on. Would you let us babysit your daughter for the day? We are going to go up the top of the hill behind town, and we're going to go to the circus. It was basically a horse show. And so that'd be a big deal. You don't have anything, you work hard every day, and here's this bit of entertainment coming, and people wanted to go see it. And so these two women took Mary in their arms up to the top of the hill to watch this show. And about that time, a big, huge storm came sweeping down, and there was lightning dancing everywhere. And so these two women ran underneath a tree. Lightning hit the tree, and both women were killed instantly. When rescuers got to them, they pried an unconscious Mary Anning, 1-year-old Mary Anning, out of her arms, took her down to town, and Mom and Dad revived her. And so she survived that as a 1-year-old. And people then, when she became somewhat famous for her fossilizing, said, well, we always knew there was something special about Mary after she got hit by lightning. So I don't know. So if some of you are struggling with getting through organic chemistry, or, well, no, I wouldn't recommend it. Okay.
So I read that she was kind of a lethargic child before that.
Yeah.
She was hit by lightning, she really perked up and became really energetic.
I guess that would do it. So she never amounted to, and I say this, in a way, she never was given the credit that she was due. In her lifetime, she was not well, maybe towards the end she was given a pension of 25 pounds a year by the king, but anyway, people that were in her orbit of interest was William Buckland, the first Oxford geologist, first geology professor at Oxford University. He was the one who published the first dinosaur, Megalosaurus, although it wasn't called that then. William Conybeare described the plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs that Mary Anning found, hardly giving her credit for any of it, at least mentioning Elizabeth Philpott in one of his papers. Henry de la Beche grew up around this area and was a childhood friend of young Mary Anning. And remember, he went on to become the first director of the Geological Survey of Britain. Gideon Mantell was a doctor. He and his wife, Mary Ann Mantell, found material near Sussex that then they took to Sir Richard Owen, and he coined the term dinosaur. So they were well-known dinosaur hunters, amateur dinosaur hunters. Richard Owen, who was at the Royal College of Surgeons, and a very influential biologist, geologist, and again, the namer of dinosaur. And then, of course, Sir Roderick Murchison. And Charlotte Murchison, Roderick's wife, and Mary Anning had similar interests, became somewhat close friends too. Okay. So she got to rub shoulders with, she also, who's the father of glaciology? Agassiz, Louis Agassiz, came to visit her and do some work with her. So here's Blandford Forum. This is where William and Molly Anning were married. There's what the town looks like today. We're not going to take time. We'll go near there. We're not going to take time. They got married. They moved to Colyton. Didn't stay there long. Moved to Lyme Regis. And to augment his carpentry, and because of an inherent interest, he would go out fossilizing because he realized that this was just the perfect time to be selling fossils, because what was happening in the 1800s and late 1700s on the continent? There were revolutions going on. Monarchies were falling. The British monarchy at times was also threatened. But the royals going on their typical vacation to the continent just weren't safe. So they looked for areas in the home country where they could go on vacation, and Lyme Regis became a very popular seaside resort. It had lost its charm again as a shipping port, because again the boats just couldn't get in, they got too large. So it became a vacation spot and a spa, and Richard Anning would find these spectacular fossils, put them out for display, and these wealthy royals and other wealthy visitors it'd be like, you know, going to Park City during what's the name of that film festival we just had?
Sundance.
Yeah, during the Sundance, where there are famous wealthy people that, you know, have hobbies and things. You know, you see the shops at Park City, and what is it? Photographs, paint, you know, things you don't need, but if you have enough money, maybe you're going to buy one of these. So it was sort of a similar thing. So they made some pretty good money off of selling the fossils. And he took his son Joseph and his daughter Mary when they were very young kids, much to the consternation of Mom, right? Here they are out on these sea cliffs in horrible weather with waves coming in, with landslides. And what had happened to Mary's big sister and Molly's daughter? Got killed in a fire. She was very concerned about the safety of her kids. In fact, Richard, or Joseph, the father, died fairly young by falling off of the black van and breaking some ribs and then getting pneumonia shortly after that and dying, leaving Molly and the two children essentially destitute. Now they have this festival every year. This is not the real Mary Anning, but there is this woman who dresses up like Mary Anning, and she, you know, will interact with the kids or be out there leading fossil hunting trips and things. And here she is looking at a fossil with a black ven in the background. So here are a few of Mary Anning's accomplishments in her relatively short life from 1799 to 1847. She found, her and her brother actually, Joseph found the first ichthyosaur in 1810, and then in 1811 she came back and excavated the rest of the 10-foot long sea monster. And they received 23 pounds for that. Down at her feet to the left is her favorite companion in her adulthood. That is Trey, her puppy. Trey died in a landslide in 1833. Okay.
Almost got her.
And here it is. Here's that first ichthyosaur from 1811, Joseph and Mary Anning. Here's a sketch that Joseph Anning did of it on the top, and here's the actual specimen beneath. This has been, for most of the time since then, it's been at the British Museum in London, but in 2011 they had a bicentennial, and they brought it back and had it on display at the Lyme Regis Museum and had, you know, a big celebration and things around that. So this is the first. And at the time in 1810, nobody knew about dinosaurs. The Meuse lizards from Holland had been found, but the concept of having these large aquatic reptiles was remarkable. Here they are in 2011, bringing the specimen back to put on display. And you can see the size of that thing, right? That'd be a pretty cool find. So hopefully we'll get there 2 weeks after a big storm, so we don't have to deal with the storm. And we'll walk down the beach and we'll find one of these. So, the first complete ichthyosaur was found a few years later. Now, keep in mind, she would spend many, many days per month combing the hills, combing the beach. To go from 1811 to 1818, that's a long time. You can imagine all the hours she put in looking for fossils and finding, you know, other things, cephalopods and other things she could sell. But to just keep after it that long is pretty remarkable. Here it is up on the top. And that specimen was sold to Reverend William Conybeare, again, the namer of the Carboniferous and a paleontologist. And he named it Eurypterigeus intermedius. Well, he didn't name it that. The genus name's changed. That's why Conybeare is in parentheses there. But in the paper, he mentions Philpott doesn't really give any credit to Mary Anning. And that was one of her biggest angsts, because she was an expert comparative anatomist. She knew the terminology. She was a scientist brought up by her own bootstraps. But the intellects of the day and wealthy people of the day didn't give her credit for that. Here are two small ichthyosaurs that were figured and published by William Buckland, again, the first professor of geology at Oxford. That guy was a weirdo. Let me just give you one example. We may have time to talk about William Buckland later, but let me just give you one example. Back then, the Oxford professors, if you had more people come to your lectures, you would make more money. So in our department, Randy Skinner would make all the money and the rest of us wouldn't make any, okay? So he kept a bear in his chambers at the university that he would bring into lectures. He claimed that he was going to eat his way through the alphabet. So he started with aardvark and anteater, and so he would just eat all this bizarre stuff. And apocryphal story has it that the desiccated heart of some famous person came to him, and he took a chunk and ate it before they could get it away from him. So he was just sort of I don't know. We'll talk more about him later, but anyway, he received some of these. To Buckland's credit, he gave some money back to Mary Anning to try and support her. Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll take the first few minutes next time, finish up a few more of the Mary Anning things, and then move on to Charles Darwin. Is that okay? Okay, we'll do that. And that'll take us through the next one and then the one after that. So next 2 weeks will be the end of Mary Anning, the end of Mary Anning and then on to Darwin. Okay, thank you.
Great job.